Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our CTD webinar today. Looks like we've got folks popping in the room. Just so I can make sure that you can hear me and that you can see a welcome to the webinar screen, if you could just type anything into that questions box, a good morning, hello, I can hear you, etc. Great. Thank you, everybody. I'm seeing some things come in. Awesome. Okay. Well, now you also know how to ask questions. So during the webinar, you're all on automatic mute just to keep background noise down. But if you've got a question during the presentation today, either you can enter it into that questions box, or you can hit that little hand icon that'll raise your hand. We can unmute you and you can ask your question that way if it's easier. And at the end of the presentation, we can certainly use all of those functions. Feel free as the presentation moves along today, if you've got a question that pertains to something going on, put it right in that questions box. We'll try to get those answered as the presentation moves today. Again, we'll also have time at the end to do a larger Q&A for everybody. So with that, I want to welcome everybody to the Center for Technical Development. This is our webinar series that we've got going on right now. If you want to see the new and upcoming webinars, please go to our website. You can see that address right there on the screen, wactd.org. You can see all the great events that we've got coming up. A partner event that we've got just next week, we're working with the Ag Forestry Group. Next Wednesday, they've got their webinar series at noon that is a great follow-up to this. It's how to conduct and hold a successful webinar and or virtual meeting. So some great tools, tips, tricks, etc. for once you pick a platform, then how do you use it most successfully? So please, if this one is appealing to you today, tune into that one. And we've got a whole host of other great ones coming in the next couple months across all sorts of different subject matter for you. So please take a look and see what is interest to you coming up. So today, just let's see, I'm going to get my camera going here. So hopefully, good morning, everyone can see me here. Today's presentation is going to be on how to choose a virtual platform for meetings and communication. I'm also going to talk about workflow and project management and a few other things as we go through here today. Hopefully, this will give you the ability to perhaps choose something. If you're in a free version, how do you upgrade to a paid version, or what are the options available to all those different things? So we're going to talk about that today. Just to introduce myself, I'm Nicole Embretson. I'm the chair of the Center for Technical Development. I also work at the Whatcom Conservation District as our science and planning coordinator. And I happen to work a lot on these virtual platforms. So whether that be for meetings, for communication, for project management, and just getting myself together. There's a lot going on these days with virtual platforms. And because we've had a few months here where we're all working remote, right off the bat, a lot of us had to adapt and figure out how to get into this virtual world. And we're still realizing that even though maybe we were resistant and just kind of muddled through at the beginning, I think a lot of folks can see this may have a bit of a long-term future to it, where we've got limited travel. We're seeing some of the benefits of working virtually, and we're able to do more of that coming up. So it's a great time. It's not too late to adopt a virtual platform and to do something now that will last into the future. And I'll show you some options for that. So let's start with some of the benefits. And then we're going to talk about some of what are the challenges, but some of the benefits are pretty obvious, but some of them maybe not so much. So obviously online meetings, it's easy to see each other right now, right? I may not be able to see all of you, but you can see me. If this was a virtual meeting versus a webinar, we'd all be able to see each other. Weirdly enough, there are a lot of benefits to that psychologically, productively. Just being able to connect with people, even in this virtual platform, really does maintain and establish relationships. I've met so many people's pets and partners and kids and seen their homes. It's actually a weirdly cool and intimate space to create with someone. there is absolutely no doubt time for a straight up phone call. And in fact, you've probably heard a lot of people talk about something called Zoom fatigue. So that is where we have so much of this virtual interface that it gets exhausting. So I think, like with most things, we started with nothing, went full bore, and we're finding that happy medium in the middle of how to use these platforms effectively so that we don't melt our eyeballs out while we're trying to use them. So I really do think there's a lot of benefit to this interaction, particularly with larger groups. One-on-one, you can still do a phone call if that's easy. It's also convenient and more inclusive. So in other words, you can have a meeting with folks across the state. No one has to travel. You don't even have to take your sweatpants off if you don't want to. It's pretty easy these days. So not only that, it's very efficient. It saves us a lot of time and energy on traveling and getting somewhere. Granted, that face-to-face human contact cannot be beat, but when we have to adapt, this is a really great way to do that. So there is a lot of that inclusivity. There's also, we'll talk about some challenges with that. There's audio and video options. So using our Wi-Fi Connect, we can now have this communication and utilize that. Granted, in my next slide, where we're going to talk about some of the challenges, that's also a challenge for a lot of people, depending on where you're at and what that Wi-Fi connectivity is. But if you have this feature and you have this ability, it makes it a nice free-to-use platform that you can utilize, which is great. There's also the screen sharing. Man, is this really helpful. So when you can't be there in person, or you're on the phone and you're trying to talk about a document and you're in paragraph 2, line 7, and that person is on paragraph 82, you know, page 21, etc., it makes it really hard. So being able to pop up the screen and share that, it also is wonderful for IT platforms. So where you can pop up a screen, you can give control of your screen over to someone else, and they could do a little fix-it for you. Those are really great features, and the majority of even these meeting platforms have that feature. There's also some other things I'll talk about today, which are strictly that, just that screen sharing, IT ability that you've got, or just sharing someone or accessing some other platform virtually, which are really, really great to have right now when we're at home. We still have a workspace that we'd like to integrate those two things together. Collaboratively, man, it's so great to be able to all work on the same document all at the same time right now and have a seamless interface going there, rather than I make edits, pop it along, that person makes edits, it comes back. Or if you've got 4 people editing a document, you get 4 drafts, you're trying to merge all that together, it's really hard. So there's a lot more and easier to use file sharing and file collaborative apps that are now on, or features that are associated with a lot of these programs. So honestly, COVID has really normalized and expanded a lot of the features and productivity apps that are out there. So whether it seems like an avalanche of things have hit us, trust me, a few have boiled to the top that I'm going to share with you today, specifically in all of these different realms of chat, editing, polling, all these various cool additional features you can use. And then recording. So if you attended our webinar last week, we talked about public records and some of the things. If you missed that webinar, I highly suggest you go back and find that recording on the CTD website. It was really helpful in knowing when you need to record a meeting, when you don't need to, but having that feature where you can have not only a recording of the entire conversation and video, but you can also get chat logs and meeting logs, all sorts of other things that come along with that. So you can meet public records requests if that's necessary, or just remember what the heck that meeting was about. So it's a great way to have that feature. Some even have closed captioning associated with it now, so that when someone is talking, you get a text type right at the bottom. Really great if you need to have an ADA or disability a customization for folks onto your website or to your meeting, etc. You've got that content right there. So really, really helpful. So there are a lot of benefits here, but there are also a few challenges to these virtual platforms that need to be thought about and taken into account when you're choosing. Number one, of course, is always cost, right? How much is this thing going to cost me? The amazing thing about cost right now is, again, because we have this boom of people using these, weirdly enough, all the ones in the meeting platforms that used to be free are now paid, and the ones that were paid and expensive are now about the same. So weirdly, when you look through these meeting platforms now, they're all going to be the same. There used to be a big discrepancy of cost and features. They've all pretty much normalized, at least the top threshold of them, which is kind of good in some ways. It makes decision making a little bit easier, but it also says, man, I can't find that really great free one anymore. So there are some free features I'm going to share with you today on some of the top platforms. And at some point, you might just say the cost is worth it. So if you're going to have to pay $10 a month for one of these platforms, maybe that's about the same as you would have spent on bagels for your staff at a staff meeting. So thinking about what is that cost, is that $10 a month or so worth it? Perhaps it really is for the features that you can get for how much you're going to use one of these. Sharing, scheduling within an organization, that's also a tough one. I know that we all try to buy one license and share it with the whole office because it's cost effective and it usually works for us. Oftentimes what that means with most of these meeting platforms is that you can only have one meeting running at a time. That really may not be a big deal for a smaller organization or one that's well organized, but occasionally it can be a problem when you get folks who want overlapping meetings or who really need to use that platform. So that's one of the bigger challenges when you're trying to limit the cost and limit the number of licenses you have to have, is that kind of overlap of sharing. Bandwidth, Wi-Fi, and cellular accessibility. This amazingly is one of the biggest problems right now with folks being able to access one of these meetings, stay in it, actually be able to share their video. If you live in a rural area, even if you're just outside of a city, you most likely have challenges with this. What is kind of interesting is that all of these meeting and virtual platforms figured that out really quickly. In all the free versions, Wi-Fi video, no problem. If you want a phone or the ability to call into a meeting, that's the paid version. They all figured out what was that primary feature people really needed and put that in their paid version. It used to be the other way around, amazingly. So that is usually one of our biggest challenges. And when you're thinking about a platform, and usually why you would upgrade to a paid version is just for that phone ability. Or you find ways that you can use some type of a conferencing line system, maybe that you have available, add that to a video platform, and you can kind of hack the system, if you will, depending on how much you're going to use that. But convenience wise, if you're going to use a platform like this very often, this is a feature you want to look for to accommodate those individuals who really need that call. And if they have poor reception, they don't have Wi-Fi ability at all, and so on. So think about that when you're choosing a platform for, let's say, internal meeting and communication, if it's for board meetings or if it's for public meetings. If you have a public interface, make sure that you have that feature so that you don't limit the ability for someone to be able to join a public or open meeting space. Technical savvy is also a big one here. If you are completely a technical savant, you're going to be fine in any meeting platform. If you are the complete opposite, if you have a lot of challenges with technical things, this might be a little bit more difficult. However, I will say some platforms are much easier to use than others. So especially meeting platforms, there's a couple that are trying to make it as easy as possible to get into a meeting, to access a meeting, to create a meeting, and that's really helpful. And I'll show you those today. Some still require a lot of extra steps. They have too much customization. They'll drive you crazy if you don't want to deal with that, or if you have trouble creating a meeting and so on. So that really does matter when you're looking at either a meeting platform or any type of the other type of a working virtual platform, and I'll show those today too, and which need or require more technical savvy than others. Last is reliability. So I'm sure all of you have heard a lot of the security feature issues or the audio issues or reliability. Early on, there was a lot of this. You probably heard about Zoom bombing, and so you have this like, ooh, I don't think Zoom is secure issue, or GoToMeeting has historical audio issues where suddenly you can't hear anybody. Just know that because of the user increase exponentially in all these platforms over the last few months. A lot of these companies have spent a lot of time working on security and reliability. And so again, those things have pretty much normalized throughout all of the different platforms. And it's not something you really have to worry about so much anymore. But nonetheless, it can be an issue with some of the different platforms. So we've talked about what are some of the benefits, what are some of the challenges, and now we can kind of get into some of the meeting platforms versus some of the working and management platforms. I'm going to start with the meeting platforms, and then we're going to move to the working and management. And by working and management, I mean things like file sharing, task completion and tracking, time tracking, and so on. There's a few really helpful ones that are out there right now that are good accessories for getting work done in this virtual environment and still maintaining a collaboration with your colleagues and your partners. And then there's this entire kind of meeting platform. A few of the things overlap a little bit that we'll talk about today, but by and large, there kind of is a handful that rose to the top. So for meeting and communication platforms, the CTD sent out a survey to conservation districts saying, what are you using? What's your level of proficiency? What are the pros and cons of some of the things you're using? These are the ones that rose to the top and that are being used by most. The two top meeting platforms are GoToMeeting and Zoom. Those are the top two, not only with our districts, but nationwide. Zoom in particular, kind of like Google, like, are there other search engines other than Google? Turns out there are, but it's the one everybody knows about, everybody uses. Zoom did the same thing. They were in the right place at the right time, and they rose to the top by far at the beginning of this kind of entire COVID response and virtual working environment. So it's the one you've probably heard about. Rightly so, they put a lot of time and effort into making it a great and easy to use platform, and it's definitely at the top. GoToMeeting is right behind it though. It is also a really great interface. It's easy to use, etc. We right now are in something called GoToWebinar. So GoToMeeting has a whole host of other brothers and sisters that go along with it. You've got GoToWebinar, GoToTraining, and so on. So you've got these two competing platforms, and the difference is, and I'll show some of the pros and cons of each of these as we go through, but you've got kind of the difference of those two being, which one do I like the looks of better? Everything else being equal, and it quite is, which do I like the looks? Do I need all these other accessories, or do I just want something really simple? So those are where those two things kind of come along. WebEx, also one that is common or more common that we've been using. When I show a comparison of all of them, unfortunately, WebEx, whether it's still competitive in pricing and features, it's just a little bit harder to use. It doesn't have as nice of an interface. It's a little bit requires more management on the back end to create meetings and establish and host meetings. So not as common because they just have a different interface and look to it. It's just not quite as nice as the others. Microsoft Teams, a lot of us are now using this platform, and Microsoft Teams is meeting, communication, working, file sharing. It's a whole universe unto itself. So it's a really big thing, and oftentimes we have both Teams and we have a virtual meeting, because Teams has some limitations if you're not in it. So you may be able to join a meeting for free, but unless you're in that whole virtual world, that's pretty well, you kind of want it connected to Microsoft 365 as well to make it work effectively. It's really an internal communication, and it has a lot of negatives when compared to things like Zoom and GoToMeeting. In the meeting interface and the ability to share screens is not nearly as nice. So I would not go that way if you're looking just for a virtual meeting platform. You've also got Google Meet in there. This is a free interface. Google is awesome in that all their products are free. The only detriment, you have to have a Google account. And amazingly, yes, that is kind of the killer for a lot of people. Gosh, I have to have this whole other account. You don't have to have a Google email, by the way. You can just have a Google account, but it can be a weird limitation. Otherwise, a pretty easy platform to use. Again, if you're already in the Google world, if you already have Google accounts internal, you're using G Suite, you're using Google Drive, etc., this is going to be a great interface, kind of like Microsoft Teams did, where they interface all of your Office and working and meeting. Google did the same with that Google Meet as that meeting ability. You can have external folks join that meeting, let's say a public meeting, etc. But just know, even anyone, public, internal, external board, they have to have a Google account. So it is not what you want to use if you're trying to be inclusive and have meetings for folks from the external world come into your internal meeting. So I would recommend that, like Microsoft Teams, is a bit more of an internal meeting device. And then you've got something like Join Me. No one's really using this, weirdly enough. It's not very user-friendly, and it's way more expensive than other ones. So while I put it here because you'll see it rated, or when you just do a search about which virtual platform, it'll be there, but just know it doesn't even compare to these other ones. And it's got some interesting features, but it won't outweigh the other ones in cost, reliability, or function. And then Slack is another one. So a lot of us are part of Slack with WACD, and it's just a real-time chat and communication. It's not a meeting platform, but it's a communication platform in a totally different way. So it's nice to be a part of it when hosted by a larger organization, but maybe not on its own. It's not what you would choose to create and host and have meetings like this, where you've got some type of an interface with others. So a bit more limited there, but great in the format that you probably interacted with it and seen it in our area. So now I'm going to go through each one. And before I get there, if you guys, by the way, have questions, please put those in the questions box and or raise your hand, and I'll get to those as I go through. So please put any questions that you've got in. I just want to take a pause and remind you guys of that and make sure you're getting through there. So I just wanted to show you of the top ones that we just talked about, some of the more detailed pros and cons. And granted, I already went over a few of them, but I thought I'd give you a couple more detailed screens, as well as I try to put a screenshot of the pricing. I know that's what most folks are interested in. Just know the pricing is going to look really similar. The features are just slightly different for each one on what you would choose or not choose if you want a free version of one of these or a paid version. So Zoom, again, as I mentioned, it's probably the most common one that you're going to hear about. It's really easy to use. It's feature friendly. It has more of like you're meeting with friends kind of feel and environment to it, whereas something like GoToMeeting has a bit more of a business vibe and feel to it. And while that might make no difference to you, to some it really does. Sometimes I appreciate more of that business professional vibe. But Zoom has things like backgrounds. You can tell right now, I don't have a background. The GoToMeeting interface doesn't have that, whereas other ones do. In some cases, that might be your definiting factor in deciding one over the other. It is kind of nice if you've got kids running around back there, if your room isn't nearly as pretty as some of the backgrounds you can choose in some of those other platforms, etc. So they are fun. Zoom also has things like breakout rooms. That's a really unique feature to them. GoToMeeting doesn't have that. GoToWebinar or other GoToTrainings do, but you really have to upgrade and pay for those. So if that's a feature you think you'll use, then Zoom is probably your choice for that breakout or for doing polls within a meeting, if that's also something you really seem would be very valuable to you. And some of these, initial features, you may say like, oh, I don't know, but like polls and, attaching documents, I don't think I really need that. But stop and really think about it. Or if you've got, outreach and communication folks, if you're going to use this interface for having not only public meetings, but per se, meetings with producers, or you're going to do outreach events, etc., you actually might want to consider some of those things as a possibility. So look at all those interesting features that you've got. Zoom is also great for big groups. Some of these platforms are much better for smaller groups like Teams is, but if you've got a lot of folks, let's say a staff meeting of 10 or 20 people, Zoom will provide a nice interface to deal with that. Some of the cons, if you're going to use this for more than one user in your office, and trading that license can kind of be a pain, and you're also limited to the number of meetings you can have at a time. Additionally, the free version is pretty darn limited. You've got 40 minutes. You can only have a couple people on there. It's pretty tight. So In some ways, yes, they offer a free version, and this is also a consideration if you're only going to use this for internal meeting with your 3 folks or a one-on-one, the free versions work great. But if you're planning on having a meeting for more than 5 people, you're going to have to look for a paid version. So just know that again, a lot of these platforms all figured out what are the top features people really want and then put all that in the paid version where it used to be in the free version. So just know that those are a lot of things you're going to find as well. But as I mentioned, this is the top used one by the majority of folks.
Nicole, we have, I'll interrupt you real quick. We have a question here, which one is the easiest for visitors to use to attend a public meeting?
That is a great one. So I would say GoToMeeting, Zoom are going to be your top and easiest ones. People can come in with a link. Zoom is different. So Zoom, you actually have to have a code. So you could just go to the Zoom website, put the code in, and boom, you're in a meeting. Awesome. Just make sure you have that code specifically. You either have to manually put it in or cut and paste it. GoToMeeting has a link. So it's a little bit easier for sometimes the folks to just click on a link and then it just opens an interface. Both of them are going to have pretty easy applications you can put on your phone, your iPad, it's on your computer, etc. to get in. GoToMeeting has a little bit easier phone function to get into, so it gives you a phone number and access code right on that meeting invite, whereas Zoom, it's a little bit harder to get to that feature, and it's a paid feature. It is not free, so you do have to upgrade to a paid feature to get that phone. Other ones like WebEx or Google Hangout or Google Meet, you actually have to call someone into a meeting. That's not one you want for easily joinable by the public. And WebEx, relatively easy for the public to join. Again, it's usually just a link that you'll get into. So that one's not bad either. But those are your top 3. The other ones are all going to be a lot more cumbersome to get into for the public joining a meeting. So again, what you'll notice is like the 2 that are going to float to the top are Zoom and GoToMeeting. I can't tell you which is better. It's going to be a preference, but those are the 2 that are going to float to the top when you're looking for a meeting space that's going to be great for big groups, for public interaction, for board meetings, and so on. Those are the 2 that are going to float to the top. You'll notice that. And speaking of that, kind of like the pros and cons of GoToMeeting and why I put it right after Zoom is for exactly that reason. That GoToMeeting, again, as I mentioned, similar to Zoom, it's great for big groups. It's a little bit more business-like. You don't get the backgrounds. You do have a lot of features to mute and unmute people. If you've got all this background noise and you want to kind of corral the environment, it's a little bit easier there. Zoom has you have to bring people into a room. You can have that extra feature. GoToMeeting does not have that. That's a real preference if that's something that you like. You can use reusable links in GoToMeeting. This is a great feature that you can create one link that is always recyclable. It's the same link all the time. It's a room that you can create. Unlike Zoom, you have a unique code for every single meeting. So if you have a reoccurring staff meeting, board meeting, or otherwise that's every 2 weeks, you can just always have the same link so you don't have to send it out every time. So that's a really nice feature in GoToMeeting, is to create those unique links. You can create a whole bunch that says, you'll start with whatever your initial link is. Let's say, GoToMeeting, your district name / and then you can have one that says staff meeting or board meeting or so on, so that you can keep track of those links and your staff can too. Cool feature of GoToMeeting if that is of value to you, if you're a type A organizer like myself. Who appreciate that. Or you've got folks who are always asking you, where'd that link go? What's the one this week? Shoot, I clicked on last month's link. So honestly, that's probably one of the greatest features I've noticed for trying to get a whole office virtually connected in the same meeting at the same time with larger groups. But again, one of the cons, you can only have one meeting running at a time. So again, there is that overlap, or you have to pay for additional licenses. So there is that feature. This also for those, and I can't see a lot of districts, but a few of you, if you also want a webinar style format, sure, you can use Zoom as a small meeting, a large meeting, a webinar. It does have those cool features like breakout rooms, etc. GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar, when you purchase one, you kind of get both if you purchase the GoToWebinar. So if you're looking to also have a webinar feature, the GoTo environment might be a little bit more accommodating to that. I would also say Zoom versus GoTo. Zoom is a little bit more intuitive and a little bit less technical savvy needed. GoToMeeting has more accommodation and a customization you can do to it. So if that's your preference, that might be the way that you go as well. Again, I think it's like the background thing. If GoTo had backgrounds, I would say they're the same, but I wish they had that. That's the one interesting thing that's been nice to have. And I can see if there's any other questions, Jan, that are coming in, you just.
I do have a couple questions in.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yep, we have a couple here. The first one is, does GoToMeeting have a raise your hand feature and a group mute feature?
Yeah, good point. Okay, GoToMeeting has a group mute. They don't have a hand. You can see GoToWebinar has a hand feature, but GoToMeeting does not. And I believe Zoom does have that feature. So does Teams and a few others has that hand feature. But as the moderator in any of these, you can turn everyone's video off, you can mute everyone at the same time. When you are the organizer, you can do all those things. And I would say that's across the board in all of the platforms now.
Okay, and we have another question. Do they have to download an app prior to attending a meeting in GoToMeeting or in Zoom?
Good question. In both of those, they have reduced that feature. So some of them, yes, you have to download an app, and some you don't. And weirdly enough, depending on the paid feature that you or what level of payment, you can even more so reduce that. Zoom is probably the easiest to get into with having no app or anything, but GoTo is also very easy. So neither of those, you have to do a lot of special steps initially. Some of the other ones, you do have to download a plugin or an app or something else. Also, please note that some of these work better on certain browsers than others. Like the Google environment, you really want to open all that in Chrome. So you have to have that browser specifically on your platform to make it work really well. So that is a limitation to be considerate of. Zoom and GoTo don't really have, some of them function better in a better browser, but you don't have to.
And we just have one last comment in the box right now. Brandy has a friendly amendment clarification. She says Zoom does provide the same link or code to be used over and over, but it might be a feature. So.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Brandy. Yeah, so Zoom also has that, the same code you can use. I'm not exactly sure if it also has like, you know, the associated like a name link to it, Brandy. Maybe that's like an Uber paid feature, whereas GoTo has like, you can just name it. Maybe that's the only difference of those two platforms, but thank you for that. So in Zoom, you can also have a reusable link space. Okay. And keep those questions, comments, clarifications coming in. If you are like an Uber user of these platforms, like type in anything you want for clarification. That's greatly appreciated to give some more info. This is just kind of doing that broad brush overview. And please note too, that I will show you like some of the limitations of paid versus the free versions of some of these. And the more you pay, the more you get with any of these. So please look those over too. If you're looking for a certain feature, like you can see when they'll give you like what's on the screen, a free, a starter, a plus, a business, and you can see how that escalates with how many people do you want in your meeting. Do you want a phone piece in there, or do you want reoccurring and room specific links and so on? Each of those will probably pop up as you pay more. If you want the ability to record your meeting, some of those have that available in free versions, some you have to pay for that. So if you have a requirement of recording meetings for board meetings or otherwise, you're gonna have a paid version to get that feature. So each one is gonna be a little bit different in what you can get to. So I really recommend, if you know you've got two, let's say, that you're really looking for and debating between, then just look at all the features available, and then you can really figure out what are those primary things you need. WebEx here, again, it's a little bit more of like that business-like interface. It's got good screen sharing functions, But if you're also trying to have a video function along with it, it's not very nice. It doesn't display video screens very well with the shared screen, and the communication makes it really difficult to see who's talking and who's not. So not as nice as an interface, and it's a little bit harder to log into. So this one, it's a good tertiary option, but perhaps not your top option unless for some reason it integrates into something that you really like. So a little bit less common. Google Meet, as I mentioned, also really easy to use. It is free, but the biggest limiter, you have to have a Google account to get in there. So again, if you're already in the Google platform and Google environment, use this particularly, or you can use this internally if all you want is an internal meeting environment and you want it free. This is an awesome one. You can have up to 100 people into a meeting and you get all the different functions. So, and it integrates with your Google Drive and Google Mail, et cetera, et cetera. So this would be a great one if you're already in this platform and you want something free for internal use. Not the best for external use. And it's really good with smaller groups. With really big groups, it gets a little more challenging to negotiate where the features aren't quite as keen. And you're also a little bit limited on some of the other features like we talked about with some of the other ones with, excess, rooms and polls and yada, yada, yada. So you can try to integrate some of those things and it just takes a little bit more work. Microsoft Teams. So as mentioned, this one, a lot of folks are using Teams more and more because a lot of people are going to Microsoft 365. So a lot of us are already in the Microsoft world. We're in the Office world with Excel and Word, etc. And now that we can't be in our offices and access those things very easily, or we need those file sharing capacity, a lot of folks are moving to Office 365. If you're doing that, use Teams. It's already free. It's part of what you've already got. If you don't have Office 365 Teams, sure, it's free, but it's only free to join a meeting. You can't host a meeting, start a meeting, etc. So it's easy to create a link in a meeting, easy peasy to join a meeting, great. It's got some cool features. It kind of sucks for a large meeting, and it's not great when you're screen sharing and trying to see people's videos and communicate. It just is a little bit more difficult when you are the presenter. You really lose a lot, and it's hard to negotiate through. So it's still working its way up, but you get backgrounds and a few other fun features that you can utilize. It takes a lot of bandwidth, though. If you are limited in your Wi-Fi or bandwidth capability, Teams requires a lot of your computer to function really well. So for instance, I can have a one-on-one with someone, but if it's more than that, a lot of folks have to turn off all the incoming video just to stay in a call with their voice. And you can't call into Teams unless you upgrade your payment to have a phone number, but there's no phone call in. So those are unfortunately the limiters, but if you're already in the 365 platform and world, then it's great because it's just part of what you're already doing, kind of like that Google world and platform. So let's look at some of the feature comparison of these. So I try to create a table so that it's kind of linear of what you get, particularly with that kind of free versus paid versions and what you're going to get with these. So yes, they all have video. Yes, they all have computer audio, free or not. Like those are the easiest things to provide. It's when you want phone video, what's the difference here? And the majority of them in the free version, you do not get phone. So you don't get that option to come in with the free version. You're gonna have to pay to get that phone feature in there. And again, if you're gonna have any external meetings, you have any staff that have challenging bandwidth, you have to have that phone. So in some ways you can see a lot of these platforms over the last few months got smart enough to figure that out, and they all are almost gonna require a paid subscription to these if you're gonna use this in any kind of, usable capacity that's going to accommodate larger groups. Attendance limits will vary with the plan. So depending on, like a lot of those you saw, there's like a basic and then a next upgrade and a pro or something like that. And each one has a different number of people, from 25 to 50 to 100 and so on. So you really want to watch for that. If you're like, oh yeah, we'll just do the easy paid version of GoToMeeting, you're like, but it's only 25 people. that you can have in versus maybe the basic of a different one is 50. So it's just that's a lot of times that difference that you can have. Or with some of them, you can have free up to a certain number of people. So one-on-one free, no time limits, no problem. But if you're gonna have in this free plan, you've got 40 minutes for 3 people in GoToMeeting, and Zoom it's 40 minutes up to 100 people, or one-on-one it's unlimited. So that might be, you know, your deciding factor for grabbing a free one. WebEx it's 50 minutes for 100 people. And Google Meet is 60 minutes for 100 people. So, you know, you've got all these lists, just slightly different time frames. Maybe we'd all appreciate 40-minute meetings. Wouldn't that make us fast talking and efficient? So maybe that is a good feature to have, who knows? But with those free plans, check that out. And it's no harm to try a free one, obviously, and then see if you like it. So you can always test drive, pick 2 of these and test drive them and see what they look like, and if you like the interface and functions. But you can see the pricing is going to be just about the same across the board, somewhere between $14 and $15 for a starter, up to maybe $20 or $30 for those like pro plans, and that's per month. And that's also per user or per meeting room. You can think of it that way. So you can share your user login, but you can only have 1 meeting running at a time. Something like Microsoft Teams and Google, the Google platform, if you want paid, are per person per month. So keep your eyeball on that. Works great if you're a small establishment. Might be cheaper to have that paid than if you're a large establishment. You can't hack, you know, sharing an individual. It's smarter to have everyone in there interfacing on their own. So just keep your eye on that. But know that, you know, a lot of these meeting platforms are about all the same. And again, this kind of, yes, they're easy or harder. I've already kind of talked a lot about that to get in and join. Some of the other features, it's that registration function is probably pretty nice for some things. If you want to have the ability for someone to register for a meeting, GoToMeeting, you can't have that registration. Webinar, yes, but a meeting, no. Zoom, yes, but only with the pro account. Otherwise, people just show up. You send a link out and hope for the best. But if for some reason you want people to have to register and you want to see who's coming and track that ahead of time, look for that registration function. It's usually a higher paid feature. Again, breakout sessions, Zoom really has the market on that one, unless you can just figure out ways to do it. If that's a feature that you really want, they all have screen sharing, just sometimes the interface is a little bit different. You can password protect a lot of these meetings or lock the meeting. Pretty much all of them have that feature for the most part, which is nice if you want that security feature. The backgrounds, I think I went through, which have those and which don't, and a lot of folks are popping that on more and more. That reoccurring meeting link as well, I was corrected in the Zoom, it is in that paid feature. And then recording. Zoom, again, you can't record unless you pay for it. So look at that too if you need that recording function, if you're gonna go for a free versus a paid version. So I'm going to stop for a second, and then I'm going to go over some working platforms, but I'll see what questions that we've got so far. We've had some more, Jan, that have come in relation to these meeting platforms.
Yeah, we have a couple of requests to share this feature comparison table. So you could post that on the CTD website for folks. And then we had a question. We are planning to do an awards banquet virtually, around 75 people with an older audience. What do you recommend?
Oh boy. Well, I would probably recommend either Zoom or GoToMeeting. And again, if you want that many people, you're probably going to have a paid version. Also know, however, that these are paid by month. You can just pay for a month and then stop using it. So if you just have one event coming up, you just want to pay for that month of this platform and use it for an event, and then you want to go back to a free version or change it, or you can, you know, upgrade to a higher level that you need for a month and then pop it back down. You do have that ability with most all of these platforms as well, especially GoToMeeting and Zoom. Those are easy to kind of transition away. So I would say probably one of those two. An older audience, I get it. You really do need a phone-in version for those folks, I'm going to guess, as well as having some type of visual that they can tune into. Either one of those is going to be easy to get into. Perhaps Zoom might be a tad bit friendlier. Just make sure you have that, you've paid to get the phone version in there as well.
Good. Yep, she says it's still cheaper than buying a bunch of food. So that might...
Totally, right? It's cheaper than a venue and food and everything else. That's a good point.
And then we have just a comment, I think, from Valerie. She's just saying to go ahead and plan on the paid version then if you're using it for board meetings, as you do have to provide that phone-in option. And then a follow-up comment, if you're recording that public meeting, remember the retention schedule for those public records then.
Yep. Yeah, and by the way, if you're thinking, do I need to record that or not? Again, check out the webinar from last week. It was really helpful in figuring out public records for these types of things. Okay, is that all the questions, Hunter? Okay, great, keep them coming in. So yeah, as you can see, you're gonna see a few of these, like I said, really float to the top as the obvious choices. Kind of like, you know, like I said, our browsers, everyone knows Google. Maybe some people know about Bing. And then there's all these other ones I couldn't even name because no one hardly uses them, right? So the same thing is happening with these virtual platforms. So now I want to show you just a few other options and platforms for working effectively and for project management. So these are external of those meeting platforms and communication. So, but again, you'll see some that are duplicative. Again, Microsoft Teams is on here. It is a really helpful working platform for your office. It is worth it looking into it. If you are going to have people continue to work remote now or into the future, if you are going to adopt a policy saying, yeah, this whole like remote work thing is really valuable for certain staff, if they're going to split their time, just allow them to work remote long term, you might want to start looking into something like this that is a file sharing and communication platform for internal work. And we've been test driving Teams. I know a lot of others have been moving there. And actually, this should say Microsoft 365, by the way. Teams is the communication part of that. But that Microsoft 365 platform has been pretty cool. It's really kept us efficient in having communication streams and be able to share and collaboratively work on documents together, and to have that meeting platform kind of all integrated in. Your calendar's in there, you've all these other plugins and ways to be productive and organized in there. So there's a lot there, but it's a lot. You open it up and you're like, whoa, that's a lot. So, but it's one thing. The whole Google platform too, using something like Google Drive, again, same. You can share files, you can work collaboratively on files. It's free, which is really nice, but again, you just have to have some type of a Google account login, which is free to create. You just want to have that and manage it. In the end, it's not a big deal if it's internal staff working on it. Dropbox, this is a great file sharing. Box is the same. So this is just a cloud-based file sharing program. There are probably a dozen of these out there. These are the ones that have risen. Dropbox was one of the first, so it's just one we're really aware of. A lot of people are moving to Box as well. So all that is, though, is just like a cloud-based file that you can share. It's not like working on documents together or anything else, but it's really nice when you have very large documents that you're trying to share amongst folks and you can't be on your internal server in the office. This is like an external file server. You can think of it that way. Again, those are usually paid. There are free versions, but they're pretty limited. So just check out what you need and you can see that interface. It's great for sharing files external of your office too that are really large that you can't email. Chrome Remote Desktop, if you're not aware of this one, this is awesome. So this is a app and you have to use the Chrome browser. No big deal, just to have that as one of your browser options. And it's free access to any desktop. So here at home, I can access my desktop at work and I can actually work on it. It's a little slower, of course, as you'd expect, but it's a great feature that we're stuck at home. I can't get to the office, but the only thing there is that I downloaded it onto that desktop I want to access before I left it. So it was like in all of our chaos of like evacuating our offices, these were things that happened. So, but it's a great one. Look into it. It's free. Again, I can give control of my desktop over to our IT person with the code, and he can fix my whatever I've screwed up. And it's wonderful. So a good one to have in the queue for sharing and accessing remote desktops when you're going to work remote long term. There's a whole lot of project management platforms out there, by the way, guys. This is just a handful of some of the top and easy ones and the ones that are frequently used by other districts. Smartsheet, I'm sure a lot of you have seen that. It is a whole world of project management of online what look like Excel spreadsheets. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of ways you can use it for project management, integration, forms, etc. There's a lot of districts now using that platform, and you can always ask one of them for a tutorial, but it's nice. It is paid. It's not the cheapest thing, but it might be worth it if it works for your office. Trello is kind of a cool, small scale internal projects and to-dos tracker for yourself. You can also share if you want a paid version with others, but it essentially makes little post-it notes on your desktop for tracking things. It's pretty cool if that's a helpful way that your mind works. Asana is similar. This is a project management app for bigger groups and folks external of your office. It's a great one to use. LastPass, this is how when we're moving around from phones to iPads to desktops to surfaces, that all your passwords are through an app essentially. So we have a gazillion passwords these days because we're all working in a virtual platform. That's something that can create them, remember them, and help you log into various things. Doodlepoll, I'm sure a lot of you know this one if you need to make meetings with other people. Well, Doodlepoll now is almost impossible to navigate because of all the advertisements on there. It still functions really well. There are paid versions if you actually want to do that to get rid of all the advertisements. And Toggle is an interesting one for tracking your working time. It is free and you can essentially start and stop a clock on tasks to see how much you're actually working on them for making your billing a little bit easier when you're ping-ponging around with different tasks and activities, or you really want your staff to manage their time a little tighter. That's a really interesting one to be able to use if you need that feature. So with that, we can open it up to questions, to comments. If other folks have things that they want to add to that list, that would be great. Would love to hear about that, but certainly some questions here. And just know both the recording of this presentation and the PowerPoint presentation will be posted on the CTD website under our training tab. So again, that table and everything that was in there, you will be able to see those things. So questions, Jan, did any more kind of come in after that? Or just to remind folks to enter questions into the chat box or hit your little hand if you want to raise your hand and we can have a communication, or you can just share verbally if you've got any tips, tricks, or other things about any of these platforms that you want to share if you're using one that might help other folks make a decision a little easier.
We have one question here. Does the Chrome remote meet security protocols for server access, two-factor, etc.?
It does, Valerie, and I will say that you have to have it installed by an administrator on the desktop you want to access. So you've got that level of security, and then to get into it, you have to enter in a password to get into Chrome and then into your unit. So it is, our IT guy allows that, so I'm going to say yes, it's secure, but you do have multiple security protocols to get into it, and you can set additional ones if you want even more. It's harder to hack, at least, yes. Okay, any other questions or folks want to share something about a platform that you're using? So I will say kind of in wrap up, as perhaps more questions come through, just to note that hopefully this helps you guys choose a meeting platform. Historically, I would have told you that like GoToMeeting free was awesome. It was free for up to 25 people. You had all the features, etc. Once COVID hit, they all normalized themselves to be essentially the same in the limited time or attendance numbers on a free version. And now the paid versions are approximately all the same or very similar. So at least cost-wise, you know, it's kind of a wash in choosing Zoom versus GoToMeeting. I would say you just pull up the free version and test drive the interface and see which one appeals to you. In the end, that's kind of what makes your decision for you, is like, oh, I just like this one better than I like that one. And it's a funny way to make a decision, but that's kind of how it rolls versus as I mentioned, if you're already in the Google world, that might be a great option. If you're already in the Microsoft 365 world, that's a great option for internal meetings. You can do some external, but those might be your great internal meeting platforms. Okay. So I see also there's a couple more questions coming in. Do you send out a standard set of instructions with meeting invitations or agendas? Actually, that's a great question, Valerie. And I will say the webinar next week, tips and tricks on how to conduct a good virtual meeting, should answer a lot of that for you. But yes, of course, I highly recommend that if you're going to send out one of these meetings to someone who's unfamiliar with them, send it with instructions on how to get in there. A lot of them are already provided, or these days, honestly, you don't need much more than click this link and boom, all the instructions. So they should be pretty easy these days, but the tips and tricks webinar should really help you on thinking through, if you're gonna host a meeting or hold a meeting, what are some things you really wanna think through ahead of time and during to make it run successfully and run pretty smoothly. Yeah, and it looks like we've got another comment on like a mixed media use, and I agree with this one. So in other words, you're not going to find one thing to rule the world here. So for instance, comment is, you know, we use Teams internally for small meetings. I use GoToMeeting for external meetings, or a lot of folks will use Zoom. We use Smartsheets for our team management, and I use Dropbox for file sharing. So you're going to have a bunch of these that you're going to roll together. That's kind of why I put them in different areas. Think about, what do you want as your virtual meeting platform? What do you want for project management? What do you want for your effective work environment? And you're going to work through a lot of those things to find the perfect blend to get things together. So with that, for time, I'm just going to thank everyone for being present on our webinar today. If you have any questions, you want to know more about these platforms or anything else, feel free to give me a buzz. You can email me info@wactd.org, and I'll get back to you. If I can't answer your question, I will find someone who can and get you the answer that you need. And lastly, once again, all the video recording and presentation will be posted on the CTD website. You can also find links to register for upcoming webinars on there that are complementary to this one, or in some other topics that might be really helpful to you. So please check out our website and look for those things. And thank you so much for joining us, and good luck on hosting and finding your virtual platform and being really effective in our current and probably long-term virtual working environment. So thanks everyone, much appreciated.